The dust hadn't even settled on the road into Redwater when they dragged her through the mud in front of the saloon. Her wrists were bound with rawhide, her dress torn at the shoulder, and her dark eyes burned with something the men mistook for fear. "Look at this," one of the men laughed, spitting tobacco near her feet. "An Apache squaw wandering into a white man's town like she owns the street." The crowd gathered the way crowds always do when cruelty promises entertainment. Shopkeepers stepped out from behind their counters. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts. Nobody moved to help. Nobody ever did in Redwater. Her name, though none of them knew it yet, was Isanaklesh. She had walked 11 miles barefoot since sunrise, her feet cut and bleeding, searching for something the men of this town could never understand. She was not lost. She was not begging. She was hunting. But to the men holding her, she was simply an easy target, a woman alone, unarmed, far from her people. One of them, a thick-necked rancher named Dutch Corrigan, grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her head back. "Maybe we should teach her some manners," he sneered, and the crowd's laughter rose like a flock of startled crows. That was when the saloon doors creaked open. A man stepped out into the afternoon light, unhurried, as if the ugliness in the street were beneath his notice. He wore a long gray duster caked in trail dust, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and a Colt Peacemaker resting easy on his hip like it had grown there. His boots made no sound on the wooden planks. His face was unreadable, weathered like old leather, framed by a jaw that hadn't been shaved in days. Nobody in Redwater knew his real name. Some called him El Fantasma, the Ghost, because he arrived without warning and left the same way, and because more than one outlaw who crossed him was never seen alive again. Others simply called him Cassidy, though whether that was truth or legend, nobody could say for certain. He stopped at the edge of the boardwalk and looked at the scene before him with the calm of a man reading a menu. "Let her go," he said. Quiet, almost polite. Dutch Corrigan turned, still gripping the woman's hair, and grinned. "This ain't your business, stranger. She's Apache trash, probably here to scout for a raid." "I said," the stranger repeated, stepping down into the street, "let her go." The crowd's laughter died. Something in his voice had shifted the air itself, the way it does right before a storm breaks. Dutch's men. There were 4 of them besides him, spread out slowly, hands drifting toward their guns. "You don't even know her," Dutch said, still grinning, though it had gone thin at the edges. "Why in the hell would you risk your neck for an Indian woman you never met?" The stranger's eyes flicked to Isanaklesh for the first time. And something passed between them, the briefest flash of recognition, gone before anyone else could catch it. "Maybe I know more than you think," he said. Nobody understood what he meant. Not yet. Dutch Corrigan wasn't a man used to being challenged in his own town. He shoved the woman aside, sending her sprawling into the dirt, and squared up. "You draw on 5 men for a squaw?" "I've done worse for less," the stranger said. The silence that followed stretched thin as wire. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once and went quiet, as if even the animals of Redwater knew to hold their breath. Then Dutch went for his gun. What happened next took less than 2 seconds, though every soul who witnessed it swore afterward that time itself seemed to slow. The stranger's hand moved in a blur, and his Colt barked once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5. 5 shots so close together they sounded almost like one long roar. When the smoke cleared, Dutch Corrigan and his 4 men lay in the street, none of them dead. All of them clutching shattered gun hands, howling in pain they'd remember for the rest of their miserable lives. The stranger hadn't killed a single one. He hadn't needed to. He walked to where Isanaklesh lay in the dirt and crouched beside her, cutting her bindings with a knife pulled from his boot. "You're hurt," he said, softer now. "I have walked worse," she answered, her English careful and precise. "But thank you." He helped her to her feet. The crowd that had laughed moments earlier now stared in stunned silence, unwilling to meet either of their eyes. "Why did you help me?" she asked, studying his face. "Because 11 years ago," the stranger said quietly, An Apache woman helped me when I was dying in the desert with a Comanche arrow in my side. She didn't ask my name. She didn't ask what I'd done. She just helped me live." Isanaklesh went very still. "What was her name?" "Naiche's daughter," he said. "Chispa." The color drained from Isanaklesh's face. Chispa was my sister. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind carried dust down the empty street, and somewhere a shutter banged against a window frame. "She's gone now," Isanaklesh said finally, her voice tight. 3 months ago, killed by men who wanted the land beneath our village, men who wear badges in this territory and answer to no one. The stranger's jaw hardened. "Who?" "A man named Silas Vane. He calls himself a rancher. He is a butcher who hides behind paper deeds and hired guns." She looked away, toward the horizon, toward home. "I came to Redwater because I heard men speak of a gunslinger who does not answer to gold, only to what is right. I did not expect to find him standing over Dutch Corrigan's men." "You found him," the stranger said. "Name's Cassidy, and I think it's time Silas Vane learned that some debts don't expire." That night, in the back room of a boarding house at the edge of town, Isanaklesh told him everything. How Vane had forged land documents, how he'd bribed a federal surveyor to redraw the boundaries of Apache territory, how he'd hired men to burn crops and poison wells until her people had no choice but to leave the land their ancestors had walked for centuries. Her sister Chispa had gone to confront him alone, believing her word and her people's treaty rights would matter to a man who had never once respected either. She never came home. "I don't want revenge," Isanaklesh said, her voice steady despite the grief beneath it. "I want the truth exposed. I want the treaty honored. Killing Vane changes nothing if his lies remain buried." Cassidy studied her for a long moment. Most people who walked into his life wanted blood. This woman wanted justice, which was a far harder thing to deliver and infinitely more dangerous to pursue. "Then we do it right," he said. "We find proof. We find the surveyor. And we make sure Vane answers in a courtroom, not a grave. Though I won't promise he leaves either place untouched if he gives me reason." They found him 2 days later in a mining camp 40 miles north, drinking himself into oblivion under a false name. It took little convincing once Cassidy explained, in his quiet, unhurried way, exactly what would happen to the surveyor if Vane discovered he was still alive and hadn't yet been silenced permanently. Fear of Vane, it turned out, could be turned against him. The surveyor agreed to testify. All that remained was getting him and the truth safely to the territorial marshal's office in Redwater, where a circuit judge was due to arrive within the week. Silas Vane, of course, had ears everywhere. He met them on the road 2 miles outside Redwater, flanked by 12 armed men, his silver-handled rifle resting easy across his saddle. He was an unremarkable-looking man, gray at the temples, dressed more like a banker than an outlaw, which made him more dangerous, not less. The next 3 days unfolded like a held breath. Cassidy and Isanaklesh rode out to the surveyor's office in the neighboring town of Cottonwood Bend, only to find the man had vanished, his desk cleared, his family gone, as if he'd been paid handsomely to disappear. But Isanaklesh, sharp-eyed and patient, found what the surveyor had left behind by accident. A torn corner of a second map hidden beneath a loose floorboard, one that showed the original, honest boundary lines before they'd been redrawn. It wasn't enough. Not yet. A torn map could be denied, dismissed, burned. They needed the surveyor himself, alive and willing to speak. "I hear you've been busy, Mr. Cassidy," Vane called out, his voice carrying easy confidence across the open ground. "And you," he added, looking at Isanaklesh. "Just as troublesome as your sister. It's almost impressive. You're going to answer for what you did to her," Isanaklesh said, her voice like a blade drawn slow from its sheath. Vane smiled, unbothered. 12 guns against 1, and you think you're in a position to make demands? 13, a new voice said from the ridge above them. Every head turned. Lined along the rocky rise, rifles trained down on Vane's men, stood nearly 20 Apache warriors, led by a broad-shouldered man Isanaklesh recognized instantly, her uncle, Naiche's brother, who had followed her trail the moment she'd left the village, refusing to let her walk into danger alone. The math had changed, and Vane knew it. "This isn't over," Vane snarled, backing his horse away. "It is," Cassidy said. "The moment that surveyor talks to the judge, and he will, whether you're standing to hear it or lying in the dirt is entirely your choice." Vane chose in the end to run, and running, as it turned out, was the worst decision of his life. Word reached Redwater a week later that he'd been caught trying to cross the territorial line with stolen gold and forged documents, arrested not by Cassidy's gun, but by the very federal marshals whose authority he'd spent years corrupting. The surveyor's testimony, backed by the torn map and a dozen Apache witnesses, unraveled Vane's empire of lies thread by thread. The land was returned. The treaty was honored, at least for a season. At least for now. Isanaklesh stood at the edge of Redwater the morning Cassidy prepared to ride out again, his duster catching the same dust it always did, his path leading nowhere and everywhere at once. "You could stay," she said. "My people would welcome you." "I know," he said, swinging up into the saddle. "But there are other Chispas out there. Other people laughed at, dragged through the mud, waiting for someone to draw a gun on their behalf." She nodded, understanding a man who could never truly rest as long as injustice walked free in the territories. "Then go," she said. "But know this, the Apache do not forget a debt paid in full." He tipped his hat, the closest thing to a smile crossing his weathered face, and rode west into a sky burning gold with the last light of day, leaving behind a town that would tell this story for years, of the woman they laughed at, and the cowboy who silenced every last one of them with a single drawn gun.